Countries are building these types of demonstration drones as a bridge to future combat aircraft that would be designed to operate inside contested airspace, in enemy airspace, in denied areas, and in particular in places where communications will be very challenging. Where unlike, say, over Afghanistan, where you might be able to have all sorts of communications with your drones, we would expect these communications to be jammed by adversaries. In fact, the Pentagon actually reported last month that Russia has been jamming the communications of US drones over Syria. So against a more high-tech adversary, these communications will be very challenging. And that will beg the question of what do you want this aircraft to do when it's out on its own, when it loses its link to a human controller? Should it come home? Should it go and do surveillance missions, take pictures and come back? Should it strike pre-planned targets? That's kind of what a cruise missile does today. Maybe a human programs in the coordinates ahead of time. Or what if it comes across what we sometimes refer to as targets of opportunity, a mobile target that's moving? That's how we've seen a lot of warfare evolve towards mobile and relocatable targets. Maybe let's imagine something like a North Korean mobile missile launcher. Very high value target, something we would want to go after. What would you have it do there? Would we allow it to, say, maybe attack this target on its own? These are very real questions that militaries will have to grapple with in the coming years as they begin to deploy these systems. We're writing the code for these kinds of robotic vehicles today. And in fact, it was this very specific issue that motivated, well, almost 10 years ago now, the Pentagon policy on autonomy in weapons that was eventually published in 2012. At the time, I was working in the Pentagon, in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and I posed the same question to my boss. And I said, well, what do you want this thing to do? We also know that the B-21 bomber is reportedly going to be optionally manned, eventually someday. What do you want it to do if the human's not in the loop? And he said, well, I want it to come home. I said, well, that's great, but it doesn't mean anything. Where's that written down? Where's the policy for that? So that eventually led to the current policy that was passed in 2012 that's still in effect today. So this is a very real practical question militaries have to grapple with. Self-defense is also an issue. This is the Sea Hunter. It's a Navy ship that is now part of the operational fleet. It is an entirely robotic ship. Now you can see in the photo there's people standing on top of it, but it's intended to operate with no one on board. There will still be people controlling it remotely, but again, if someone were to come aboard and grab, jam its communications and try to board it, what would you want it to do? There was an incident about a year and a half ago where China grabbed control of a US Navy underwater drone in the South China Sea. China just took it. There was no one there to stop them. Now they said afterwards, the US sort of cried out about this, give us our drone back. The China said, oh, we're so sorry. We didn't mean to. That was totally unauthorized. Just some junior person did this on their own. And they gave it back. But this is a $20 million vessel with a lot of sensitive equipment on board. Its mission is submarine hunting. It's intended to track enemy submarines. So would we be comfortable letting this just fall into someone else's hands? Or would you maybe authorize it to use force to defend itself? It's not just in robotic vehicles that we're seeing more autonomy. This is the screenshot for a video depicting the long-range anti-ship missile. It's a US missile that has quite a bit of autonomy, really pushing the boundaries of what we're seeing. In this case, the human still chooses the target, the ship intended to attack enemy ships, but the missile itself can change its route on the way. So this video here is depicting this idea that on the way to its target, it might run into a pop-up threat. That's the red bubble that you see in the screen. And the missile itself would choose to change its route to move around this potential threat. Again, now for now, humans are still choosing the target. But it begs the question of, would there be a follow-on evolution in these missiles where they might get to the point where they could choose their own targets? Some degree of autonomy in munitions has been around for decades. This is a photo of the high-speed anti-radiation missile on a Navy F-18. It's an anti-radar missile that's widely used by the US and then similar missiles like this by many other countries to attack enemy radars. We've had munitions for at least 70 years since World War II that are fire and forget weapons. Once you launch them, they're not coming back. But humans still choose the target. I'll describe them in this diagram as what you see depicted in the blue is what I'll call semi-autonomous weapons. So we have around the globe today weapons where the human knows that there is an enemy in a given location in place, given sort of geographic space at a given point in time. And the human says, I want to attack this tank, this ship, this submarine. And they may not have a lot of information. In some cases, it might be just a ping down a line of bearing along a sonar underwater. But the human says, there's an enemy here, I'm going to attack them. And then we might release some munition, could be a missile, could be a torpedo, to go after and attack this enemy target. The technology that's coming down the road, and it exists in some crude forms today, is the potential to build what I'll call fully autonomous weapons, which you see in the red. A weapon that could go out over a wide area and hunt for its own targets. Now, humans would be building these. Humans would be programming them. We're not talking about robots building robots. It's not yet. And humans would launch them, but the human would not need to know maybe where the enemy is. You could simply consult your war plans and say, well, it seems reasonable to think the enemy might send tanks into this valley. Or there might be submarines in this sea. And I'm going to let the robot go find them all on its own. And that fundamentally begins to change the relationship that humans have with violence on the battlefield. Another concern that comes up is that these weapons might be destabilizing, that they might threaten international security and stability in a way that might make it more likely that countries might go to war in the first place. As one example, I'll point to what we've seen in stock trading, where we actually have now, in the past several years, reached a domain of stock trading that is highly automated, where there is quite a bit of machine trading, and we've seen accidents that come from this. This is a screenshot of the Dow Jones during the flash crash several years ago. And we've seen actually several flash crashes since then, where these algorithms interacting at machine speed in milliseconds have unexpected interactions that lead to things like flash crashes, or they have vulnerabilities that humans take advantage of. Something else that's come to light in the investigations afterwards, that in this particular instance, there was a London-based trader who was taking advantage of weaknesses in these algorithms and spoofing them, and using a weakness in their algorithms to manipulate their behavior to try to change prices intentionally. And that's illegal to do that. And he eventually got arrested. But in war, you don't have regulators that can say, well, this isn't fair, don't do that. And you don't have what regulators have done to deal with this problem, which is they've installed circuit breakers that would take stocks offline if the stock price moves too quickly in a period of time. Well, there's no one to call timeout in war if your robots and your algorithms begin interacting with the enemies in a way that you did not expect. And there are similar competitive similarities between stock trading and war. You have a competitive environment. You have an advantage in speed. You're certainly not going to share your algorithms with your enemy. And so what would happen if we face something like a flash war? How do we anticipate and then try to mitigate against that kind of risk? For 5 years now, there have been discussions going on internationally about autonomous weapons, where countries have been coming together at the United Nations to discuss what, if anything, might be done about these. There have been a consortium of non-governmental organizations led by Human Rights Watch and others as part of what they refer to as a campaign to stop killer robots. A bit of an inflammatory term, but intended to, I think, drum up interest. And you see some of them in the foreground here. There have been at least 24 countries that have said that they would like a ban on these weapons before they could be built. But none of these countries that have signed up to them are leading military powers or actually leading robotics developers. They're not really the countries that are advancing the technology in any case. A big unknown in this space is how valuable are these weapons? You'll have many people talk about these as though they are total game changers, right? If you have autonomous weapons, someone else does it, you have to respond. That's not the case for everything, for all technologies. If Saddam Hussein had used chemical weapons, that would not have changed the outcome of the war, ultimately. It might have slowed the US down a little bit. But it wouldn't have changed either the Gulf War or the 2003 Iraq invasion. In this case, it's just not clear. I think it's really honestly not clear with autonomous weapons how valuable they are. If you think about robotics and autonomy as a whole, extremely valuable. If you think about this narrow instance of taking humans entirely out of the equation, humans add a lot of value. This is still the most advanced cognitive processing system on the planet, the human brain. The two instances where you'd want to take humans out might be speed, as I mentioned earlier, or if you have this robotic vehicle that's on its own. And you can see instances where that might be necessary and valuable. It's not clear, though, if you said, well, I'm going to require humans to make these final decisions. So I'm going to have that robotic vehicle out there, and it finds the North Korean mobile missile launchers. But I want humans to make those decisions, so I'm going to build a communications bridge back. I'm going to have a bridge of robotic vehicles and aircraft that are acting as communications relays. And just a little bit further back, there's a human who's just, yep, that's okay, I authorize that target. They press a button. How much does that take away from a military advantage? I think we don't know, actually. I think it depends a lot, actually, on how militaries might use the technology. I do think the broader question about terrorist attacks is valid. We have the video side, and we have seen attacks by the Islamic State using crude homemade armed drones. One of the things that I do in the book is I try to understand how hard would it be to build one of these things in your garage? Like, what does it really take to do that? So I'll give you the spoiler. It's terrifyingly possible, actually. The things you would need to do this would be, you need the platform, you need the robotic vehicle, you need a weapon on it, and you need the smarts for it to make these decisions on its own. So you can buy an autonomous quadcopter online for a couple $100. And they're pretty advanced. They can take off and land on their own. They can fly GPS points on their own. They can track and follow moving objects all by themselves. And they can avoid obstacles like trees on their own. So that's doable.